Recording started.
Go ahead.
Good morning. Hopefully you can hear me. Welcome to Forums That Matter, a community service of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Cleveland. I am Marlene Blatnick-Fries, a member of the Forum Committee, and I am coordinator of today's discussion, which will be both remote and in-person audiences. Our topic today is Route to a Clean Energy Ohio. We'll have Q&A from 9:30 to 10. The mics will be passed to our in-person audience. We ask our virtual audience to put questions in the Q&A box. Also, virtual viewers can turn closed captions on and off at the bottom of their screen. I'm going to ask everyone now to turn your phones off or put them in airplane mode. This program is recorded and will be available in a few days on our website, uucleveland.org. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Grant Goodrich. He is the executive director of the Great Lakes Energy Institute at Case Western Reserve University, where he works to grow the energy-related research efforts of the university. Previously, Grant led efforts to attend and grow businesses in Greater Cleveland while serving as the interim CEO of Team NEO, the Northeastern Ohio's regional business attraction entity and Jobs Ohio affiliate. Earlier, he managed the international research projects of the Earth Institute at Columbia University. Grant is a decorated veteran of the U.S. Marine Corps. He is a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and U.S. Marine Corps Command and Staff College. He received his master's in public administration degree in environmental science and policy from Columbia University School of International Public Affairs in New York. Grant and his family live in Ohio City neighborhood of Cleveland. So please welcome Grant Goodrich.
Thank you, Marlene. Good morning, everyone. Give me just a minute to get the screen sharing done. Make sure we can see that. Okay. Oh. It's a projector. There we go.
We have a power outage or what?
Give me a minute. Let's see if we can change slides here. There we go. Okay. Well, again, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation to join all of you this morning. And I'm looking forward to having this opportunity to share both my work and to talk about the energy transition that's underway right now. I like to move around. I will do my best for those of you who are joining us remotely to stay in the camera, not cross the screen as I was directed. And I'll also do my best to try to stay on time and speak clearly. I do have a tendency to speak quickly. I will do my best to try to stay with a good tempo and pace as we go throughout this. Does the audience do you guys like to engage with me while I talk? Do you want questions as we go along coming from me to all of you? Would that be, do you like to be engaged? Yeah. I see a few yeses, all right. So why are we in the middle of an energy transition right now? Yes, someone, can I see again from someone? AI. Artificial intelligence. Demand is growing up. That's one reason we're in the middle. Yes, ma'am.
Climate change.
Climate change, absolutely. That's a major driver. You only get two during the whole morning, so.
Demise of coal is also a problem.
Demise of coal. Finite resources. Fossil fuels are non-renewable by definition. They are finite resources. And you've seen in some countries around the world how that's dramatically shaped their energy policy because they no longer have access to domestic supplies of coal or natural gas, and they're dependent on imports. And that has dramatically shaped energy policy in places like the United Kingdom, like Germany, like Japan. Any other thoughts? For an administration changing everything. That's not why we're in the energy transition right now. But why are, any other thought? Yes, ma'am. Why are we in the energy transition?
What fossil fuels are doing to the environment, climate change plus.
Climate change plus what fossil fuels are doing in the environment. So let me share some of my thoughts on this. So we touched on the last 2 points here, but I want to mention the first 3 because I think this is really important. We are in an energy transition right now because renewable resources are cheaper. The technology is better than it's ever been. And that's really important to say when you talk to someone who says, well, you know, we looked at solar 10 years ago, full stop, look again. The prices have come down, the technology is better, the technology is more reliable. Control systems, for those of you who want to take control of how you use energy, when you use energy, and how you pay for it. You have household and building management systems for your energy, and you can decide you're only running the washing machine when you have solar coming in. You're only charging your car when your household battery is powered, and you can go almost entirely off grid right now with the control systems that are in play. I mentioned finite resources, but I do want to emphasize this last point. We have to make this transition. If we want to transition, I'll call it, have a smooth landing, a soft landing, and an economy that continues to function. This is a transition that we have to make. And we'll talk about this more shortly. Having a presentation with a very, I'm imagining right now, and I apologize, you never know what, for an audience what your level of knowledge of energy may be. And I will cover some things as simple as what is a watt, and we will get into far more technical topics such as what is our carbon budget. But it's always tough to present to a very, very wide range of knowledge levels about a topic. But climate change truly is the existential challenge of our age. And this is part of why we see around the world, and certainly in the last administration here, billions and billions of dollars being put into the energy transition, because we are talking about systems shift. Right? This is not just about changing light bulbs in a house. This is changing how we do everything. And you'll see in the other slides here how dramatic a change we're talking about in order to get to something that looks like net zero and to realize the possibilities of a clean energy economy. I put this up here. There's lots of different slides that explain the natural greenhouse effect on our planet. I chose this one because I think it's important to say, look, the greenhouse effect on our planet is natural. Without it, we do not live on this planet. It would be far too cold for us to live on planet Earth. All right, but this greenhouse that we have that is the effect of carbon dioxide, of water vapor, of methane, of nitrogen oxide, those greenhouse gases and a few others that are not there in quite as much quantity help keep our planet on average at a nice global average of about 16 degrees C. And it's as we go up, again, we have more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. They are trapping more heat within the atmosphere. This is why we're getting warmer. This is very, very well established science, right? This is how this works. I know most of you probably grew up where you had in physics the conservation of mass, right? Mass is neither created nor destroyed. It's just rearranged through a chemical reaction. All right, so when we think about it, you know, you go home, you burn wood in a fireplace, or you remember burning wood in a campfire, you remember the ash that was left over, you know you put water vapor and other gases into the air, and you can think about, again, this is where the carbon's going. A lot of it is getting trapped up in the atmosphere, and it's important to keep that in mind. I mentioned this, I think it's helpful to understand, the Yale program on climate change communication is a great resource to look at what do Americans think about climate change. And this is a fun resource to dive into. It's done by county across the United States, so you can take snapshots in to see what people in the county think, what people in Tulsa, Oklahoma think, and around the country, and understand different attitudes towards climate change. This percentage often surprises people because when you think about what you see in mainstream media, you would be left to think that Americans are far more skeptical that climate change is going on. But this number is actually quite high. And I think this is a number that we share with people a lot of times to help them understand that although a lot of Americans aren't talking about climate change, they understand and are concerned, and a lot more Americans are now alarmed about climate change. In many ways, the threat of climate change and the need for an energy transition is what drove Case Western Reserve University in 2008 to set up the institute where I work, and that's the Great Lakes Energy Institute. We have looked at our responsibility in working with the university, and we are university employees. We are housed within the university. You know, there's three things that we're really focused on, and again, depending on the year, depending on what our faculty are doing, any one of these main areas may take a more prominent role. But it's new basic science, and while there's so many technologies that are available today, there are still needs to drive the cost down with new materials, new approaches, new systems. Because if we can continue to drive the cost down, then a lot of the things that we'll talk about today are far more accessible to communities like ours. Getting that new science into technology and out of the laboratory and into the marketplace. This is a relatively small piece of our portfolio, but it's an important part of succeeding in this energy transition. And then a future ready and educated workforce. Those are really the three main components as we see of, you know, how does R&D factor into, and a research university factor into the energy transition. I've mentioned some of the things that we do as an energy institute here at the bottom. A lot of our strengths are in materials, battery chemistry, and then harnessing the data revolution with artificial intelligence and machine learning to improve materials performance. Those are some of the areas where we've had particular success. As I mentioned, we've been around for 17 years. I always find that number hard to believe because I was there when we celebrated our 10-year anniversary, and I still can't believe I've been there for 8.5 years. But I just wanted to note this because we've been very successful. This has been a very exciting time. Part of the reason I have been at the Institute as long as I have is because it's been such an interesting time in the energy transition. And there's so much going on. And I think some of the things that I'm proudest of really are, we run a fellowship program with about a dozen students each year called our Think Energy Fellows program. I know some of you here have probably gotten to work with Case students over the years. We have amazing students on campus, and our undergraduates are really top-notch and second to none. So it's been a pleasure working with them. We've had several student startup companies go out and try to make it in the real world. We have a few that are still going and hope for their success, and we've got a few student projects right now that are getting a lot of interest. So we'll see if they're able to join that list. One thing for those of you who have, who know Case or know how research is done today, this won't surprise you, but research is a team effort today. This idea of the Einstein sitting in the lab coming up with E = MC squared, that's not how science is done today. Science is done with teams. And in terms of being successful in bringing funding in, whether it's from the state, from the federal government, from industry, investors and funders like to see that you've got partnerships. Universities are great at fundamental science and bringing in students. Again, when you bring in students, that's part of how you're developing students to become the researchers and the practitioners of the future. When you involve the Department of Energy's national labs, we have 17 national labs across the country. devoted to energy, not talking about the NASA labs or the Army labs, but places like Argonne and Oak Ridge and Los Alamos, places that you've heard about in the movie Oppenheimer or in reading, Richard Rhodes' book about making the atomic bomb. Those places are huge factories of research and development in the energy space, and they're also great places for partnerships because they have greater capacity to take that lab project that you had and scaling it up. So instead of making 10 grams of something, they can help you make 10 kilograms of something on your way to commercialization. So partnerships are important. And then industry, if you have an industry partner on a project, it makes all the difference because you're showing the funder that industry thinks there's something here. There's something here that the market wants, and that helps make your project far more investable. Just to mention a few of our key researchers involved in energy-related research. Some of you may have heard of, some of the names on here are some of our stalwarts in the engineering school who have been hard at work on aspects of the energy transition for a very long time. Bob Stavenel and Jesse Wainwright were working on fuel cells before they were working on flow batteries, but trying to solve different issues in the material space. You may say, well, how is working to transform unrecyclable plastics into recyclable plastics part of how you view energy? Well, again, we're thinking about systems related challenges and opportunities. If you don't have to extract petroleum from the ground and transform that into plastic resin and make something and just throw it away, and you can keep reusing that molecule and keep it active in the economy, that's an efficiency over time. And that's part of the reason the Department of Energy in particular has been interested in that work. One of the other things that we've been blessed at CASE is in the last few years, we've hired some amazing researchers, and we have a great team of young faculty working in places from chemical engineering to physics. Katie Del Torio, pictured on the bottom left here, is a roboticist. She has it's a worm robot that's about this big, and she's trying to figure out how to get it to burrow and lay conduit for electrical lines right now under a project funded from the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Energy. So again, really, really amazing work that's going on. I mentioned our fellows. They are, again, wonderful. This is one of the groups that was working on these energy harvesting sensors, but using it for small drones. And they actually won through pitch competitions. I think in total, they won over $30,000 over the course of the year of their project work. So again, our students are wonderful, and I could talk about them all day. Let's transition a little bit and go back into more detail into energy. I start with this slide because I think starting with what is a watt as a unit of power measuring the rate of energy transfer is helpful. And thinking about, okay, so 1 watt is a joule per second. So a 60-watt light bulb, we all grew up with 60-watt light bulbs, is 60 joules per second. Today, obviously, that's a 10-watt LED bulb with the same amount of lumens as that 60-watt light bulb had. And so in a snapshot, you can already see how much more efficient that LED bulb is, right? You can see it's 6 times more efficient than that old bulb. Kilowatt hours, everyone here who gets an energy bill from the illuminating company or CPP, your bill is written in kilowatt hours and how many kilowatt hours you use. And so that's measuring energy, and that's the capacity to do work, such as creating heat, light, or motion. And so you can then translate that 60-watt light bulb run for an hour is 0.06 kilowatt hours. And all of you who are paying, I don't know, I'm a CPP customer, so I think we're at 13.5 cents per kilowatt hour when you factor in transmission and distribution costs, and you can figure out how much that costs. So anyone at home can go home and figure out, okay, if I run that light bulb for an hour, how much does that cost me? And so that, again, as we start to think about taking power over how we use energy, this is power. And this is, when you look at the average US home size, this is the rough average, 900 kilowatt hours per month in the US. When we talk about energy, we also have to talk about the electric grid. And I find this is just a nice, easy way to simplify what is the grid? There's three key components. You have generation, all right, that's where the electricity is made. That could look like a lot of different things today, and we'll talk about that. All right, you are then taking the electricity that comes out of that generating station, it goes to a substation, the voltage is ramped up, it's moved long distances across transmission line, high voltage transmission line, to roughly the community where it's going to be used. It hits another substation, that voltage is brought down, and that electricity is then pushed into the distribution system. And that, as a way to think of it, that's that last mile around your home, all right, where your home or your business connects to the grid. All right, and so when we talk about the electricity grid, we have to remember we're talking about three distinct components. We're talking about generation, we're talking about transmission, we're talking about distribution. In Ohio, there's, as far as I know, there is no generation that's currently owned by our major investor-owned utilities. AEP, First Energy, Duke, and I guess it's AES that owns Dayton Power and Light. They do not own the generation side. All right, this was part of a decoupling that Ohio did years ago. And so those companies are focused on transmission and distribution. And when you look at your electric bill, if you're one of those customers, you will always see that T&D piece on your bill. And right now, there's transmission is very important. Ohio today imports more electricity than it produces on the generation side. That's been one of the consequences of this decoupling. All right, and so what you are seeing is companies like First Energy, which has the monopoly in our region. All right, they are trying to improve their transmission capability to help bring those electrons into the region. We can come back to this again. We'll have time for Q&A, and I know questions about how our system here in Ohio works comes up all the time. I bring up this slide as to what is renewable and non-renewable because how we describe things matters when we talk about energy. I very rarely will talk about things as renewable or non-renewable. I will usually talk about whether or not it is emitting greenhouse gases or is a near net zero emitter of greenhouse gases. Because I think, my opinion is, given the nature of the climate crisis, I think it's far more important to talk about what is putting greenhouse gas emissions into the air. But again, nuclear power, until we have successfully and repeatedly recycled uranium pellets and have been able to reuse that as a power source for another nuclear reactor, today nuclear is considered non-renewable. Obviously, coal, oil, natural gas, all non-renewable resources. And whereas you'll see bioenergy here on the bottom right, again, depending on how that is managed, that could be a very significant emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. But it is considered renewable because you're regrowing those crops or woody feedstocks. Again, this is just to make the point that when we say renewable, we're really talking about, is that a renewable resource? Everybody, quick audience participation moment. Anyone know where this is?
Seattle.
Not Seattle, not in the US.
Paris.
Not Paris, not Toronto.
Dubai.
Most people think it looks like Toronto.
Dubai.
Not Dubai. This is Shanghai. This is China. All right. And when you look at this slide, suddenly that makes sense. So again, this is 2021. It's not changed a lot since then. This is total energy consumption in million tons of oil equivalent, which is another rough way to compare energy across different systems. The important takeaway here to say is that, yes, China today is using nearly 2 times the amount of energy that the United States is. It's important to remember that part of the reason that happens is because so much of our manufacturing has been offshore to China. All right, and so an item that you are consuming here today, perhaps this glass, all right, was manufactured in China that is then being consumed here. So we've actually offshored some of our emissions, as has Europe and other developed countries, to China, where they make things and they are emitting on our behalf and then sending it back to us for us to consume here. One of the reasons I put this slide up is also to show you that India, which has 4 times our population, India's population is over 1.4 billion today, Ours is approximately 350 million. But their use of energy is less than half of ours. And so it raises these questions about equity. All right, do we have an obligation to countries that are still in the course of development to not use as much energy? This is more of a historical slide. We'll see some more accurate slides about where we are today. But I love this slide to show you. I want you to look at that gray peak around 1920 when coal was king in the United States. And I feel that this is probably the most important political slide that I put up here, even though these are strictly energy consumption figures. But this ties into the emotional and nostalgic connection we have to the coal miner in this country. Almost, when you look at how significant a piece of consumption that was for our energy as we were, fully in the industrial revolution here in this country. Almost everyone here, if your family was here in the early 1900s, you probably have a member of your family who was in the coal industry in one way. They were a miner, they were shipping it, they made furnaces that used it. My great-grandfather was a coal miner in Indiana at a time. And so when we talk about the role that coal communities have in the American political psyche and in certain communities, Kentucky and West Virginia and Southeast Ohio and Wyoming, this is part of that connection, even though the influence and role of coal in our energy consumption in the US today is far, far lower. This is a much better slide to look at the share of energy consumption by source in the world today. I want you to take away three things. All right, if we're to get to net zero, the entire green bar, gray bar, and red bar has to go down to zero. It's an enormous amount of consumption globally, right? This is not a, we're going to fix this in a day. We're not going to fix it in a month. We're not going to change course in a year. All right, but those numbers, the green, gray, and red bars have to go down if we are going to achieve net zero. And the other bars that you see above it, the nuclear, the hydropower, solar, biofuels, and other renewables, those have to get much, much, much bigger. All right, so to me, this is a great snapshot to see just the magnitude of the challenge in front of us when we talk about energy transition. I also show the slide so that everyone understands that we are burning more coal today than we ever have in history. All right, we're burning more oil today than we ever have in history. Okay, these are global numbers. Let's just understand this is where we are. This is some good news when I think about the energy transition. And again, I'm sure some of you in this room, you know this by heart, you've seen this. The important takeaway here is if you look at the far left of the slide, you have that kind of deep orange. I brought a laser pointer. You have a deep orange bar that's running vertically down the left side. That is that, and you'll see it there, that's that range of non-renewable electricity cost. All right, so we've got to be, if you look at for renewables up top, you've got to be under 10 cents a kilowatt hour to be cost competitive with coal, oil, and natural gas as your source of electricity. Well, all of those costs are coming down. The reason those are long bars there is that because you have, part of it is you have different costs in different places. We'll talk a little bit at the end about why costs in Ohio in some cases are higher. In some cases, you've got an ideal geography for hydropower or geothermal. It's going to be far more efficient and far more productive. All right, but the good news here is that a lot of these prices are coming down and are becoming cost competitive. This is a better way to look at this. I know this is an eye chart. I do apologize. I encourage, if this is something you're really interested in, go and look at the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA.org, and look up price of renewable energy. And they do annual reports looking at the global price of electricity. This is a chart that they've used every year, so you can find different versions of it. This is the 2023 chart. There's some important things to point out here, and you know, we talk about levelized cost of electricity. This is the far right side as a good way to try to compare electron to electron across different systems. How much does that cost? All right, and what you see here on, if you look at the far right and where we are in 2023, you can see that onshore wind and followed by solar PV those are the cheapest sources when you look strictly at levelized cost of electricity of renewable energy. When you look at the 2010 bar, again, this is only 13 years difference. You can see that costs have come down in almost every case, except for with geothermal and hydropower. Geothermal is exploring new directions you're going to hear about something called enhanced geothermal if this is something you're interested in. We have companies that are getting started up to look at electricity generation with new forms of geothermal power, basically dropping in different kinds of heat exchangers. It's a very exciting and promising new technology. It's still probably 10 years away until we see even demonstration plants that are up and running that give us a sense of how that's going to work. But keep your eye on geothermal as an opportunity that you're going to hear more about here in the very near future. The other thing that I want to mention is capacity factor. This is when we hear from opponents of solar across Ohio, they will always say that solar doesn't work in Ohio. Solar does work in Ohio, but it's important to remember that your capacity factor is low. Again, audience participation moment. I know where you.
Well, there are two kinds of solar. So silicon-based and CAD telluride.
Yeah.
Silicon, when the cloud goes by, it drops to zero. CAD telluride, when the clouds go by, you still get some out. So we should be focused in Ohio on cadmium telluride-based solar power, which First Solar out in
Perrysburg, yeah.
is very good at.
Yeah.
The problem is that there's a disposal problem with CAD tel. And so they don't sell.
But that's not entirely true because they'll recycle everything.
Yeah, they don't sell them, at least.
Yeah.
Right.
They're gonna take all your panels and they're gonna recycle it. The challenge with First Solar is that if you go over to First Solar today and you ask to buy solar panels, they'll say that's wonderful. We're thrilled for your order that'll be delivered in 2030. Because they have such a backlog of orders that they are delivering right now. That's actually a problem across the energy industry right now. The gentleman over here mentioned data centers and the rise of AI. If you want to put a gas turbine in the ground to start making electricity to power your data center, all right, you will maybe get the turbine delivered in 4 years, and you'll be up and running in 5 as of today. All right, this is where we have some supply chain shortages. Companies like Eaton that make transformers, they are reconditioning a factory down in South Carolina to open up a new production line for transformers because there's so much demand. You want a transformer today, they'll say, thank you very much for your order. You're going to get that in 66 weeks. So you've got a year and a few months to wait. We have challenges right now. We do not have everything we need to build out our energy system. The answer to the audience question, 4.5 hours is what you can estimate over the course of the year as your daily production of solar. You have solar today, I'm sorry, you're lucky to eke out a few kilowatt hours today, if that. It's going to be a tough day today. But capacity factor extends across all forms of generation. If you have your internal combustion engine out in your car, your capacity factor is only 40 to 60%. So we have an efficiency problem with our system. Again, another reason why research and development on energy technologies is so important, because eliminating inefficiencies with everything is a great way to start to make our systems more efficient and drive down emissions and waste. This slide comes up when we talk about CO2 emissions and greenhouse gases. The point I want you to make, this is cumulative CO2 emissions over the last roughly, this goes back to 1751, so obviously some of this is estimated. But when people say at the conference of parties, we hear about COP, I think we're at COP 30 this year, the This is the annual conference to negotiate greenhouse gas emissions reduction across countries. It happens in the beginning of November each year. The developing world says to the developed world, well, wait a second, you put all these emissions into the atmosphere. It's your responsibility to help us. And this is the slide that they're pointing to, saying, well, the US has had an outsized role in putting greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. European Union second, China third. You should be, you know, and you look at a country like India with its 1.4 billion people, and they have they're only responsible for 3% of cumulative historic emissions. And you see this challenge, this dilemma we have of, is there an obligation or a responsibility for the developed world to help the developing world? I put this slide up here because a lot of people say, well, what about deforestation and the role that that has with cumulative emissions? All right, when you look at agriculture, forestry, and land use, that's only 18% of global emissions by sector on an annual basis. Energy is the 900-pound gorilla in the room, so to speak, and that's all uses of energy in industry and transportation and buildings, fugitive emissions from methane that's flared off, energy in agriculture and fishing. Obviously, there's also that small portion in industry, cement and chemicals manufacturing that releases CO2 through the chemical processes in that manufacturing part. So I do want to point that out. Just a few slides left. I see Marlene's already stood up to indicate that I need to wrap it up. One thing that I hear all the time is, well, what about the, if you're driving a battery electric vehicle, you've got your Tesla or your Chevy Bolt out in the parking lot, and you say, well, what about the embodied emissions in that car? Well, there's no magic wand here. There's no there's nothing out there that has no cumulative or life cycle greenhouse gas emissions that are zero. But this is an attempt to compare apples to apples across different sectors. So if you look at the far right, going from right to left, you have coal, oil, natural gas. The blue is the black bar you see in the middle is that midpoint. Your blue is really where the majority of your emissions line up. Again, we have different efficiency of systems. The white is really that max range, your error bars, all right, when you take into account that you have vastly different systems. When you go over to the far left and you compare where coal is to where wind energy is, where hydropower is, where solar is, you see that we're really not. These are vastly different, vast differences in terms of life cycle greenhouse gas emissions of technology. This is where that biopower comes back in on the far left. Obviously, depending on how well a system is managed, if it's well managed, emissions can actually be very, very low. And with carbon capture could be negative. On average, they're positive. If I can digress for a second, this is a really important slide. This is the one where again, we come back to conservation of math. All right, you burn up fossil fuels that you've harvested from the earth, you put them in the atmosphere, you know that that's warming the planet. So how much more carbon can we put in the atmosphere without crossing what we've just defined as these planetary boundaries of 1.5 degrees warming of Celsius or 2 degrees of Celsius? So when you look at the far right, and I apologize for everyone in the room, I know this is a hair fuzzy, but let's take the top line and go to the far right. All right, when this was done by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in their 6th assessment report, they said that the likely range of warming above pre-industrial levels was at 1.07 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. So coming down to that first line, to stay at or below 1.5 degrees warming, that means we would add another 0.43 degrees of Celsius warming. And so to have the likelihood of staying at or below that range, if we want an 83% likelihood of staying below 1.5, we could only put another 300 300 gigatons of CO2 into the atmosphere. All right, if we wanted only 17% likelihood of staying below that number, we could put up to 900 gigatons of CO2 into the atmosphere. And you'll see that 900 is also the same number down the bottom right of having an 83% likelihood of staying below 2 degrees warming. We globally put about 40 gigatons of CO2 into the atmosphere. It changes a lot each year. So when you hear someone like Greta Thunberg saying we only have 7 years of our global carbon budget left to stay below 1.5 degrees warming, this is a remark she made about 2 or 3 years ago. That's what that means. At our current rate of emissions, to stay below 1.5, we've got about 7 years. Judging by the informed nature of this audience, I'm sure most of you saw that Copernicus, which is the European Union's science agency tracking climate change, said that last year we hit 1.54 degrees above pre-industrial level. There have been several scientific articles in the last year saying the planet is warming faster than we thought, and that should be something that we should be paying much more attention to, and is a reason for more research required in this area rather than less. I mentioned 2 degrees. Again, 2 degrees is a number that gets people at leadership levels in this space very anxious, because 2 degrees is feared to be a place where we cross tipping point, where we start to lose either large amounts of ice up in Greenland and Antarctica, where we see ecosystem collapse, and potentially where we see our agricultural system, which was developed in a pre-industrial age, face what we describe as first world famine. I don't want to sugarcoat that. I think people need to understand that that's why that number is important and why this transition is important. We're almost done. We have 2 working slides left. I realize this is very hard to read up on your slide, but the point I want to make is that we use in the United States about 100 quadrillion British thermal units of energy each year. Of that, only about 32% translates into actually delivered energy services. Right? We talked about capacity factor. About almost 2/3 of it is rejected energy in some ways. It's the waste heat that comes off of your car or your furnace that's not harnessed. It's the steam that goes into the air when you're boiling water that wasn't captured for something. Right? So when you take into account how efficient our systems are, they're not very efficient still. And this is an enormous opportunity for improvement. This is why we always talk about, how we make a transition, focusing on energy efficiency as a place to start. The other reason that I like to talk about energy efficiency as a place to start is just that, when you look globally, you have countries that are enormously wealthy and productive, like Sweden and the United Kingdom, that are using per person half the energy that we use in the United States. All right. Obviously, the goal, if we talk about a clean energy transition, the goal is this bottom line on the right, that we have wealthy economies, successful economies that are not putting greenhouse gas emissions into our atmosphere. That's what that looks like. We're not close to that today. We also have this big challenge of countries that are at the far left, that are extremely poor, that are considered to be in energy poverty, that are, that may have electricity for 2 or 4 hours a day, that want to rise out of poverty and want to move to the right across the spectrum. And this is part of that, again, that global obligation. What obligation do we have to other countries that raises a lot of questions? I'm going to stop here. I know there's questions about the transition for Ohio and maybe Senate Bill 2 and House Bill 15 here. We could talk about local issues, but I'd rather leave that for your questions and see where we'd like.
Thank you very much, Ken. We're now going to start our Q&A. The in-person audience will be given mics for their questions. Remember to hold it close to your mouth. And for those at home, remember to put your questions in the Q&A box. And begin.
I have a question regarding the attractiveness of solar power. I came back from Florida and I saw solar ranches, and they're not I know here in southern Ohio, 2 counties voted down, so because of the fact that it would destroy the landscape. Is there any research or anything being done to make it a more viable, attractive, instrument for development of power instead of these vast arrays of shining objects?
So most of the research that's being done today is looking at how communities engage with solar development and understanding, why do communities reject solar? Where and why are communities accepting solar? You may have seen in a comment I had on Spectrum a few weeks ago. Largely, it's your perception of the use of the land as it is today. If you drive past a dilapidated, abandoned field or parking lot that's not being used, that's not been used for 20 years, and next year you drive past and there's a solar field on it, often your perception is, finally, we've done something productive with that space and that land. If it's a cow pasture where you've driven past since your childhood and you're used to seeing cows graze and clover in the field, and one day it's a solar panel, or it's a solar power plant, and you feel like, well, there goes the neighborhood, you have a negative response and a negative reaction. There's actually been a lot of research done. A lot of developers who are engaged in doing best practices know they need to engage the community early on to understand what their hopes and fears are. You can, just like we do on the highway, you can put in, evergreen tree lanes to block out solar fields from being seen from the highway by neighbors. If you engage early, often you can address fears and understand what the community wants. But developers are reluctant to do that because as soon as someone finds out they're sniffing around the area, the price of land goes up dramatically. This is not going to get solved anytime soon. I would say here in Northeast Ohio, when you look around, we have an abundance of places that could be used for solar, like the parking canopy that you have here, like brownfields, landfills, rooftops that are available for solar that don't share so much of the eyesore problem that you bring up. And we should be developing those right now. I hope that it addresses most of your question, but it's not a perfect solution, but engage earlier with the developers. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I'm wondering, I'm so encouraged by this presentation and really hope that this information gets out because there has been a sea change since the election about support for energy development to the transition. So my question is, how do we not lose momentum under the current regime? How do we keep supporting organizations like yours, when we see such threats to the Department of Energy and this type of work?
So one of the first things that you said, just in terms of encouraging information, I meant to leave this up at the end. Every slide that I shared, I'm not making things up on my own. I don't have time to do that, to be honest. If you go to the U.S. Energy Information Administration is responsible for tracking all kinds of data on how the U.S. makes, exports, and uses energy. Please check this out. You can find incredible resources there.
I was looking last night on it and some of the pages were not accessible. And I was wondering if it's going to be shut down.
I don't think it will be shut down because this is also how the oil and gas industry, how the coal industry reports all of their data. There's an enormous amount of information here. I was on there yesterday. I was looking at when the U.S. started to become a net exporter of oil and oil products. Everybody knows that we are a net exporter of oil, so that when we drill more, we're just shipping more of it overseas. Everybody understands that, right? That's on EIA.org. You can actually see that we peaked our imports of oil and oil products right before the big recession, 2007. And since then, obviously, we've had the shale gas revolution, which has transformed energy in this country. And you see roughly in about 2019, 2020, we became net exporters of oil and oil products. So again, all of those, I lost my slide. All of those, IRENA.org, EIA.gov, Our World in Data / Energy are all great resources to look up and find this information for your own. You asked the question about how do we maintain momentum, given that the current administration has decided that they are, well, in many ways, it remains to be seen if they're going to fully pull incentives. They are attempting to claw back some of the IRA funds that have been pledged. A lot of that is being held up right now. We'll see how that plays out. But it's clear that this administration is far more favorable to oil, gas, nuclear. We've heard some platitudes about geothermal. Again, we'll see how that plays out. And in many ways, it's hard to see what we're going to do. The two things that are very clearly moving forward is they are moving forward as quickly as they can with natural gas exports as a way in which, again, we all see that the president feels we're in the middle of a trade war, that trying to push natural gas exports is one way to change that trade balance. And that's one thing that we export that a lot of the world, as you saw, we're still consuming globally enormous amounts of coal, oil, and natural gas. That's something that a lot of the world wants from us today. If we want to maintain momentum on the clean energy transition, you have to vote. You have to vote with your pocketbook, and you have to tell your electeds that this is important to you. I had the same conversation on Thursday with a classroom of students at Case Western Reserve, again, understanding your agency, the power of your pocketbook. All right, I was doing some short math on this yesterday. If I take 200 of my commutes from Ohio City to Case, if I drive those 200 days, it's $2,000 in parking fees, and it's about $550 in gasoline. All right, and so I am providing resources to the gas company and to the parking lot owner. All right, or it's $1,000 to the RTA to improve the RTA system. So our choices, determine the resources that, our systems have. Again, we have to think about these as system-wide issues. And really that's the biggest way, voting with our feet, voting with our pocketbook, voting at the ballot box. And I do think as people also start to understand, like the systems that are there today, we work with a renewable energy buildings architect from Kent State University's College of Architecture. He's got a smart home. He's almost entirely energy self-sufficient with solar on his roof, a battery, an EV, and smart home controls. Like that technology is there, and the cost has come way down to do that. And he lives in Lyndhurst. He's not summering in Florida as far as I know. So that technology is there today, and I think helping people understand that that's accessible is important. One of the challenges we have in Ohio, and this is part of it, the ecosystem to install a lot of these energy technologies is still nascent in our part of Ohio. Good luck finding a traditional HVAC company who will install an electric heat pump in your home. And there might be one or two companies in all of Northeast Ohio who are doing geothermal heat pumps. Because there's not a lot of competition, those costs are staying higher for us here than they are in other parts of the country where you have 10 installers of geothermal heat pumps and you have more choice. And so again, as we vote with our pocketbook, we create demand and hopefully we start to build a market for that here. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
I think you may have just answered my question, but I grew up at the table of a lovely gentleman in manufacturing, my father, and he always touted the issue of R&D.
Yeah.
It resonated with me, R&D. And when he saw the transition in corporate America to shareholder value, it terrified him.
Yeah.
And here we are. But I think your answer is Ralph Nader was right. We've always our pocketbook.
Well, again, we do seem to forget that we have agency. Things become comfortable, things become convenient. We are trying to get on a different train here. All right, and maybe that's not even the right metaphor. We're trying to leave aviation altogether and go back to something different. I mean, the idea that these are simple jumps from train track to train track. Again, had we started and stayed on this transition much earlier, And Jim Hansen at NASA has been warning about this for over 3 decades now. Had we stayed on the transition, had we invested fully as the fourth of the nation behind the transition, the United Kingdom is going all in on offshore wind. They have a plan to build out, I mean, it's a staggering amount of offshore wind, and they're already meeting about 20% of their energy needs through offshore wind. So they're looking to quadruple that in the next decade and harnessing literally the whole of the country's resources to do that so that they can be energy independent and net zero emitting. So it's possible, like there are countries who are doing this. Go across the channel, again, other countries understand the consequences of inaction. France just released their national climate adaptation plan because the French are looking at this saying, we've hit 1.5, we are likely hitting 2 and 2.7, and the biggest country in the mix, the United States, is not playing in this game right now. And so if we don't play, other countries are going to understand the implications of that is adaptation. We have to prepare for a warmer, wetter, drier, depending on where you live, climate, and that has enormous implications for all of us. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, the whole Ohio situation in our legislature and what they're doing. This is a big question with very little time, but what are the prospects for Ohio being able to get back in the game of solar and wind energy and being able to manufacture, et cetera, with the legislature restricting it so much?
Not today. I mean, that's a very simple answer. Our legislature, our Senate, I think what we're seeing in Senate Bill 2 and House Bill 15, at least is an understanding that by having chosen to do very little other than to support our investor-owned utilities over the last 10 years, but by not investing in generation, we now find ourselves having trouble coming up with the electricity that we need specifically to support new manufacturing and to support new data center growth. I heard an economist speak earlier this week who said, over the next 30 years, energy availability will drive where new growth happens more than any other single factor, because some communities don't have electricity and are not going to have electricity, and other places are going to have it. My personal strategy is, I think we should be telling the legislature to build nuclear. I think everybody knows we built Perry Pad 1 out in Lake County, and Pad 2 is empty. There's an empty pad at Davis-Bethany. I realize these are long-term. I realize they are expensive, but they also produce for 60 to 80 years, and there's no net emissions. And to me, I think that's part of it. I also think that we need to be building as much solar as we can today. Again, if it's a megawatt at a time, if it's 10 megawatts at a time, we're moving the bar. And I think as people become invested in understanding the transition, they start to realize their role as well in reducing their own emissions. What's remarkable is that when you look at when a household puts solar on their roof, an EV in the garage, a battery in the garage for their car, suddenly they start to realize they have agency with how they use energy, and their houses become more efficient. They're using energy when they want to. And so even though they've added the EV and maybe they've added the electric dryer and the electric range, their electric bills almost always drop still, and they're burning far less natural gas. So I continue to say, yes, there is a role for the individual homeowner, even as a renter, talking to your landlord about changes that you can make, because the technology is there today to do that.
Okay, I'm very sorry, but I think that's all we're gonna have. I just have a few announcements. Our next 9 a.m. forum will be on May 4th. It will be 100 days in an open discussion on the Trump administration. For those who would like to receive reminders of our forums, there's a clipboard in the back that you can sign up for. Those of you would like to come to the Sunday service today, it is Light of Mine Senior Sunday. This is a joyful service created by our high school seniors. If you want to see what's happening at our congregation, you can check out our website at uucleveland.org. Thank you for coming. Have a good week.
You.